Well, hey, I'm Mark.
And I'm Rich.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the passing back and forth of audio files for post-production. So, Rich, I hear you whining a lot about how you get files from other folks giving you projects, and like the AAFs, could be formatted better, or the picture's not better. So, what a great conversation to have about like the right way of doing that, and working seamlessly and efficiently with a post-production house.
Yes.
Particularly like in the audio side, which you are. So I'm just going to set up a scenario, right? And
Yes.
then maybe you can kind of like walk us through what the appropriate thing is to
Yes.
do. Okay. So I am a video editor or a producer or a director, and I just finished my project. I locked my cut. It's in
Yes.
my editing system. And now I have to go to an audio professional to finish up, the mix and all that. Who do I call? What do I do? And let's just start there.
Yes. Well, I think what it is it's not so much. It's the understanding of what an AAF and an OMF, and actually handing off the elements of their edit to actually a sound designer or a dialogue editor or the person who's going to be doing the mix of their project. And we're very fortunate that Mark and I have worked together and collaborated for such a long time that we've worked this out. And I think what it is a lot of video editors or picture editors are on an island, and they don't interface directly with a sound department or an audio person. So a lot of times they just, when they go to hand it off, they're just the format of what they're doing is just not in the most organized way. And there's certain specifics of an AAF or an OMF, which basically an AAF is an advanced authored format. That's the newer format to actually sending out the deliverable parts of what they did to the audio person. The old format was the OMF, which was the open media format. So basically, what I've created was a turnover spec sheet, which makes it easier. So walking them through the actual process of what an AAF is. So basically, with a video editor, it's nice to have organization of, basically there's three elements to their project. There's dialogue, there's sound design, and there's music elements. So basically, if they can, when I first talk with a video editor, try to have them, do their edits at the beginning, it's great to talk to them. So then they keep all their dialogue on dialogue tracks. They'll keep their sound effects on their sound effects tracks, and they'll keep their music on their music tracks. And then when they go to export this AAF to us, there's certain parameters. So what I did was I created this spec sheet, so it just kind of takes the the guesswork out of it, because a lot of times they're not used to actually exporting AAFs and doing this in their regular workflow. So a lot of the first elements of this, is one, the picture, the reference picture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk in terms of my DAW is Pro Tools. There's different DAWs to work in as an audio person, but the industry standard's been Pro Tools. So working from Pro Tools, and what Pro Tools likes in terms of the video format is a 422 ProRes Proxy file. So not just the full ProRes file, but the ProRes Proxy file. So giving that ProRes file, formatted that way, because whenever I get a file that's in an MP4 is not a frame accurate file. So no matter what, your AAF is going to be sub-frames off from your actual AAF. So
and subframes might not feel like a big thing to like an editor, but once you get to like the audio side of it, like they don't, like audio folks don't work in frames, right? They work in subframes. So, like that's kind of like a big deal. So, and I would say the other thing with to think about, the difference between the MP4 and the ProRes file is, like the MP4 is a compressed file that, like not every frame, it's not every frame's an iframe.
Yes.
Right. And so like you're going to have those subtle differences. the reason to go with the ProRes file and the ProRes Proxy, because it doesn't need to be super high quality, right? It just needs to be frame accurate. So the ProRes Proxy, and I mean, you probably don't need 4K. Do you ever want 4K?
No, you don't want 4K. Pro Tools doesn't like 4K either. So a 1920 by 1080 ProRes Proxy file. So a 2K file is actually the optimal file for that. And like you said, there's, especially when you're dealing with sync, dialogue sync, and you're trying to place a sound effect, if you're even subframes off, it looks soft. And the only way, so when you're pulling in this AAF and you're making sure that everything is in sync, the only thing you have is reference to that movie file and the audio that's in that movie file. So we'll just talk about that real quick. The movie file, what you want to export is that ProRes Proxy file. You want a 1920 by 1080 movie file, so it's a QuickTime format. And you want to do either 24-bit, 48K. You either want to do 24-bit or 48K, or if you want to keep the file a little bit, smaller, you can do 16-bit. But it's really crucial that everyone, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, it's so big. I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. The other formats are not a frame accurate file, like you were saying. So that's the only way that's, when I'm getting this handed to me, I know that it's in sync. So what I'm going to get, the mix that I'm going to give back, whether it's a 5-1 mix or a stereo mix, I know that when I give that back to my editor, he can confidently put it in, and it's going to, put right back into a system, and it's going to be in sync.
Yeah. Nothing's worse than getting something back and it shifts and it's out of sync. Over time, it's just mind-boggling and frustrating. And it doesn't need to be. I mean, it could be mitigated.
Because if I start moving things, then we don't know where zero is. We don't know where ground zero is, and you have to start from a ground zero point. And if I start shifting things, that's why I'll always, if it's out of sync, like if I get a file, I'm always calling the editor back and say, I need you to re-export it, and we'll work through it, because a lot of times they never have done this before. So we're trying to figure it out. There's certain settings, and then you get the optimal thing. And yes, that's why.
Well, let's go back. So we talked about the the video format itself. So you're in your editing software, whatever it is, file, export, 1920 by 1080, ProRes Proxy 422. But let's talk about the project file. Or the project setup itself before we hit the AAF. And the way that I like to think about it is, in terms of as an editor, in terms of organization, is the first couple of tracks are going to be dialogue, whatever the dialogue is, and at any one given time, that might be 4 tracks, right? At any, if I'm kicking out a reel or I'm kicking out a documentary or whatever, more often than not, you're not going to be more than 4 characters, in that. So sometimes in a documentary, it's only 2, 2 people talking, right? So it's kind of finite, in that. So I'll put the finite things up top. So the dialogue goes 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, right? Then below that is the next finite thing, which is probably the music, right? You're not going to have, at least from an editor, music composers are different, but from an editor's perspective, I'm not going to have eight different audio or 8 different musics in one section, right? I'm going to have 1, maybe 2, and they overlap a little bit, right? So then now you're thinking the next couple of tracks, let's just say in this example, 3 and 4, right? 1 and 2 is dialogue, 3 and 4 is music. Now, sound effects that I've added, that goes across, that really opens up. I can keep pushing things down and pushing things down and pushing things down. So that's why I put sound effects at the bottom of the tree, because I don't know how many there might be, right? And
especially for an editor like yourself, you're editing with music. Sometimes your edit decisions are based on the music or the temp music that you're working with. So having that close to where the dialogue is helps, I'd imagine.
It does. It totally does. Yeah. Because if not, then you're constantly scrolling. You're okay, I'm scrolling down. Where's that music? No, put that music up so I can see it, easier, and then it also helps the, communicate to the, to the audio person when I export it. It's okay, track number 1 is Jack. Track number 2 is Jane. Track number 3 and 4 are music, and then everything else after that is sound effects. I think they're cool sound effects, but you're probably going to change them anyway because you have more tools than I do. But anyway, like,
Correct.
you know.
Yeah, but it's nice to have that because you'll take it and enhance with what's already there.
Yeah.
So it's like it's helping the process of the whole sound design process because you have an idea of what the director or what the editor is already thinking.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times what I'll do is like I'll take like some of the sound effects, they're just garbage, just for placement.
Right.
It's like I think there's a door close here, or I think there's like a bell, and I'm just gonna do like a quick search like online and grab a crappy bell, knowing that like you have a real bell and you have a real door and you have like but when we get to that spot, you know, it's like, okay, I put this in here just as, you know, like
kind of a placeholder.
A placeholder reference, you know, maybe something to work off of. You know, but there might be like a series of, you know, like sound effects then that go into you know, what becomes like practical like effects, and then stuff that maybe like sounds more like on the creative side, like the drones and the things that, like, they're not music, they're not, you know, practical effects, you know, they're not production audio, right? Oh, we should talk about that too. Now we have like our sound effects here. Sometimes, you know, it's beneficial before, and a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, like in this next little phase here, I think could be considered in the conforming part of the process. So like you edited everything, and you know, now when it's time to hand it off to the next person, these are some things to consider before handing it off. You know, so like, let's say for example, in my dialogue track, there was like a whole bunch of production sound effects, right? Like maybe it's a scene where, you know, like someone walks in the room and they're not even talking, you know, like they're coming in, they're making a pot of coffee, they're slouching down on a chair, they're, you know, all that stuff is production sound. That's not dialogue, which is going to have to be separated anyway.
Correct.
So like that kind of stuff, put it down, like pull it down, even though it was production audio, there's no dialogue in it.
Correct.
Pull that down into the sound.
But I would keep it on its own production audio track and keep that consistently across. You know, one thing is if you're doing a feature film and you're doing this in reels. So another thing too is about time code. So setting the job up so you're starting at 1 hour. So you want to have, you know, you don't want to start your jobs at 000 time code because it's the 24-hour line and you can't go beyond the 24 hours. So what you want to do, the industry standard for years has always been starting the project at 1 hour, and you're going to have a 2-pop at 59:58, which is literally 2 seconds before with a 2-pop. Then if you have your bars and tones at the head of that, so that's basically where you're starting it. But then if you're working in reels, like a feature film, so then reel 1 is 1 hour. Reel 2 is 2 hour. Reel 3 is 3 hours. Same thing doing that. And then you have the same thing. Like what you said with if that was production sound effects, I would keep it on its own production sound effects track. And what's great in an AAF is if you label it on your track and say, you know, PFX, that will actually translate when I get it. So that's the difference in an AAF over an OMF. Actually, other metadata actually comes with it to help the editor in knowing that. And also, editors will get production logs from their production sound person, and saving those and giving those to your sound designer helps tremendously, because especially if you have a project that has a multi-track, has more than just those 2 or 4 tracks, where you had a separate audio person who was running code to the cameras, and they're doing a mix. So usually what's happening is tracks 1 and 2 in their system is a mix of everything. Track 3 is their boom, and then lavs happen after that. And a really good sound mixer keeps the same lavs. If they're on a multi shoot for many weeks, you know what I mean, or you know, a couple days or even weeks, they're keeping the same actor with the same lav on the same tracks. So even if actor 1, you know, the next day wasn't there, they had actor 2 on there, they don't put actor 2 on track 1. They keep that respectively throughout the whole thing. That helps the editor, and it also helps the sound person, the audio person, when you get to mixing and cleaning up dialogue, to know exactly where everything's at.
You know what? That's a great point, but I would say that only works, that only is helpful if like the discipline of the editor to keep those
Yes.
that hierarchy.
Yes.
Because very, very easily, like when you're getting like a multi-track, like the instinct is to like start deleting stuff that you don't need.
Yes.
And then you're pushing things around. Okay. And then no matter what how great those those notes are that you got, if I as the editor moved them, you would never know.
Yeah.
Like and you're looking and scrambling. So like me as the editor, I would have to be disciplined enough to follow that and then hand it off to you. And believe me, it happens all the time.
Yes.
Like if there's like 6 tracks open and only 2 people talking, like actor 1 is track 1 and actor, let's just say 3 is in the scene and they're on track 3, but actor 2 isn't there. Like the instinct is to
get rid of
track 2 and move things up.
Yeah.
But now you kind of screwed up that list. It's not the end of the world.
No.
But it's just, you just kind of took things out of that organization.
Because what happens to the audio person is they're trying to keep, when they're pulling in the AAF, they're trying to keep booms on booms. They're keeping lavs on lavs, and a lot of times keeping the actors on their own lav tracks. Because in modern day film with independent films, you're using both microphones now, and you're phase aligning these mics, and you're using everything. Production audio is really important, more than ever now, because the budgets for ADR just aren't there. So the more that you're in sync, so that's why it's great. That's why we have such a great relationship, because both of us, we kind of anticipate and know. And if you as an audio person have the ability to develop a relationship with an editor and work for years with the same editor, now you get this workflow going, and you guys know. And if he does delete tracks, you kind of know. You're able to do that. But if you're so many times, and it even just happened last week, I sent this to them, and still you're getting things back, and it's there. Okay, where was the disconnect, in the communication, so we can get what we need. You know what I mean? Because it's time's money. And if I'm spending all this time just trying to reorganize a job,
it's less time actually doing the job.
It's less time doing the job.
I've been yelled at enough by Rich over the years. He's a mean mother trucker when his tracks aren't in order. You don't want to do that.
It's just a high level discussion.
No, but you kind of figure out, like what that kind of like that shorthand is, of course, kind of like over time. But I think, some of these fundamentals that we're talking about, regardless, like of where it's going, like if you can kind of keep that organization and then be able to communicate that organization, believe me, the person on the other end that's getting it, that you may or may not, like we're lucky that we've worked together for so long, but like, you might be in a position where you've never met this person before, right? And they have no idea what your project is. So,
and you don't know their education, where they came from, and a lot of times, even they're going to these schools and film schools, and it's like, God bless them, but they're not teaching these things to them. It's amazing how many editors that I've worked with through the years, and they're like, well, what's an AAF, or how do you do this? And I'm like, well, these are like this is like 101. This is, you're going to have to interface with an audio person, and it's just the basics of what this stuff is to get what you need back in the right way. So that's why, we create these spec sheets so you can walk through and do that, and then you get to the AAF itself.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the AAF a little bit. So we talked about, and I'll talk about it from the like from an editor kind of perspective, which is knowing just enough about it, to use it. And so, we have our list of things that we need to turn over. We made our movie file. Now we have to make our AAF file. And an AAF file, at least the way I think about it in my mind, it's a project file. It's the same as, if you're in Premiere, exporting, like a Premiere file, a project file. It's just a more universal file type, .AF. And what it does is it references, just like every other project file, it's a reference file that references all the media and then can reopen and all the tracks and all the sounds in the spot that they were edited in. Like the picture's not in there. This is just the audio. So think about it as it's an audio project file. Used to be an OMF. We're not going to get into that. Like that was the old way. a lot of editors still export that, but we're talking about, like AAF. So I need to supply, like the sound people, with that picture, and then that AAF file. Now, when I say it is a reference file, now you have to remember this too. It's different in the fact that it can be encapsulated, meaning that in the file itself, it's all packaged together with all the media, right? So it's not like here's a media folder, and then here's the AAF project file. Now it can do that, and we're going to get to that. But for what we're saying right now, encapsulated puts those two together into one file. So when I hand it off, I'm giving them two files. Here's the movie file. Here's the AAF file. And in that AAF file, it has collected all of the audio media and put it in a nice little bundle, There's limits to that, which is why we do reels. Like there's limits to how big that bundle of files can be. I think 2 gigs.
It's 4 gigs.
Actually 4 gig, yeah. 4 gigs is like the max. So if it goes over 4 gigs, then it has to be that separate folder and project file.
I think AAF doesn't have a limit. OMF definitely had the limit of the 4 gig, but I think that's one of the advantages of this AAF file.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it still has a limit because it has yelled at me before.
It's a little bit larger. I'm sorry, I don't have the actual thing, but there is that expanded in that. But keep going. That
So
exactly.
So you keep those 2 files, and when you export them, they're exported from the same timeline, right? So from the same master timeline. So I have my master cut, I have my master audios, everything's in timeline A. I'm going to export my video from that, and then I'm going to export my audio from that. So all those time codes match. So when he opens it up, he opens up in his system, it populates the audio all in its different tracks, and then he takes that video track that's timecode locked and puts that on its own single video timecode track within Pro Tools. Pro Tools isn't going to stack up in a video. I don't even know if it can or not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not talking out of my dupe.
No, I can't. Yeah, it can't.
Okay, one. Yeah. Just one video track. One track.
Okay. You can do it, but you have to switch to
Okay.
all that stuff.
So that's the that's the.
So why is a 2-pop important for you?
Okay, so the 2-pop is important for me, and I'll say this for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of keeps me organized of like where I am in time, like on that timeline. 2, to know like when I go to sync things back, when I get things back from you, I have like a super secret backup version that I can match up 2-pops. And so, what I do is I normally start, if it's one timeline without reels, let's just say it's just one.
Yes.
I will normally start it at at 5950.
Yes.
I'll give myself 10 seconds of pre-roll, where I'll put all my slates and crap that I need to know, like kind of going into it.
And
then
countdown.
Or whatever I want. And then at 59:58 for two frames, it's like that 2-pop with a white flash.
Yeah.
And then
it's a 1K tone. Traditionally, it's a 1K tone.
Easy way to find that. You can find it yourself. Just the bars and tone generator. That's on any one of the editors. I just pop that up, pull 2 frames of that 1K tone down, and it's built into pretty much everything. I'll put that on there, and then at like once 1 hour hits, and that the time code's ticking, tick, 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 at 1 hour exactly. That's when the picture starts. And then I know, and a lot of times we'll do in long format is I'll do that's the 2-pop at the beginning. I'll also do it at the very end. Now,
and why is that important too?
So you can make sure nothing's drifting, right? So like the first one would pop. Right, and it works great, but if that last one doesn't line up, then something has drifted. You know that, and it's supposed to be, like there's some science behind it. I just throw it at the end of the. I mean, I don't want to say I arbitrarily throw it. I arbitrarily throw it at the end. Like the picture ends, like I take a sip of coffee and then I'm like, that's plenty enough time. Throw a 2-pop in there. It's just for an ending reference to know if that has synced or not. And then that's what you use then, right? To
absolutely
do everything.
So that's why it's really important. He's starting at 5958, or 5958 or 5950. It's very important to start at 0 frame time codes when you're starting off for syncing, because if he just starts at 59, 58, 22 frames, it's weird. And if you have to do something, it's like you're trying to find where ground zero is always at, because if something, like you said, drifts or something, you're trying to, here's home base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We know where home base is. Okay, something is wrong, something happening, especially like if you encoded the file and just different, something, we have to figure out where it is. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's happened in this last feature. There was one scene where it was off. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. Everything else was in, but one scene, the dialogue was off from the picture. And he was like, no, that shouldn't be. And I'm like, well, it is, and it's like, so.
And look, mistakes happen, right?
Exactly. And it's not to blame anybody.
No, it just happens. Like when you have all of this stuff,
in
the timeline, it's very possible that, the last time I watched the cut, it was, everything was perfectly in sync, but maybe I accidentally sneezed and hit the mouse, and that one piece of audio moved over a couple of frames, and I didn't know any better, and then I exported it, and the beginning of it's great, and the end of it's great, but the middle part was moved over 2 frames, whatever, it doesn't matter how it got there. What matters is we can identify that it's off 2 frames and fix it.
And fix it. That's what it is. It's about problem solving. And we go back to why Mark was saying it's so important to have an embedded file instead of everything in it separate. So Pro Tools, when you begin to import this AAF, and if you've got hundreds of clips and it's not embedded into that file, that one file, Pro Tools is going to say, I can't see it. Now, do you want to manually sync these or auto sync? And you go, oh, I'm going to auto sync. And you sit there and go get a cup of coffee and come back in about an hour, and it's still trying to find those folders, and it goes, ink, can't find them. So now you have to manually go in and do hundreds of files of actually relinking all those clips. So with an embedded file, and the second thing too, with those files, you want to do what's called handles. Handles are really important. And you want at least 72 frames or 3 seconds of handles, because then you're able to pull out his edits to make crossfades. Because if you don't, you have all these butt edits of the clips that happen. So you want to be able to be able to pull things out. If you got to massage and edit or do something, it's really important to do that with 24-bit 48K. So it's really important that the video editor sets up his job with 24-bit 48K as the reference for the audio, because if you set it up at 16-bit, you're taking the sound mixer's 24-bit file. You just did a sample rate convert of this, So
someone just making a lot of.
We got a truck coming back in there, right? That's
a two pop.
That's the two pop. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so. I'll say this too, it's 2025. Right, and technology has come a long way, but relinking is still a pain in the ass.
It's a pain, man.
It's never fun.
No,
things always get lost, and there's always a manual component to it. That's why we put in time to our schedules, to do conform processes. It's not the fun part of the job, absolutely not. But it's a necessary step, because even when we take all of these steps that we're talking about to mitigate all of these time vampires that come up and. In the conform process, it's still going to happen, and it's okay, right? But mitigate it as much as possible. So,
and especially the sound designer, to make sure in your Pro Tools job that you are actually copying all those files into the folder. I never have it where it's relinking. So everything, sound effects, everything, there's a setting in Pro Tools where you make sure all the audio goes into that audio file in the Pro Tools project file. Because then you're creating an island. Because then once you back it up, or if you have to come back to that project a year from now, 2 years from now, what we did, 5 years from now. Oh, what was it? Just recently.
2014. So that's 75 years ago.
Yeah. And we found it on a hard drive, and we're like, and I opened it up, opened the job up, and it was awesome. It was all there.
Yeah.
That's what's really important with all that.
Well, I think we're probably
we're
running along on time. That's pretty good. I think maybe the next time we'll talk about we talked about the conversion or the handover for the audio. Maybe we'll talk about like the handover then for color.
Yeah.
And effects, and then maybe even like, okay, now you're done with the mix. Now let's get it back and put it back into the system and marry everything back together.
Especially surround.
Once it's back.
Yeah.
Oh, surround. That's a whole conversation. Let's save that. Yeah, that's good. There's so many ways you can screw that up. We can help mitigate that. Yeah.
Not saying you did it. But.
Yeah. Not saying that I did it a lot. I did it a lot, but we learn from it, right? You learn from it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
we hope this helps.
Yeah, hope this helps. Thanks.